Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pause for Pedagogy, a conversation with Kirstin Phelps and Martin Wolske about perspectives on digital leadership development from technology education with the International Leadership Association. My name is Dan Jenkins, and I'm Chair and Associate Professor of Leadership and Organizational Studies at the University of Southern Maine and co-editor of Pause for Pedagogy. The ILA and I are thrilled to welcome Kirstin and Martin to our latest conversation in the Pause for Pedagogy series. So, two guests. Kirstin Phelps, she's a doctoral candidate at the School of Illinois, and her research intersects information, socio-technical systems, network science, and leadership, specifically exploring collective leadership roles around information sharing and use within community settings. Prior to pursuing her doctorate, Kirstin was a leadership educator and served as assistant director at the Illinois Leadership Center. And Martin Wolske is a senior research scientist, lecturer, and interim director of the Center for Digital Inclusion at the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois. His research and teaching are in the area of network systems, where he explores social and technical systems using creative digital literacies, design thinking, and rapid prototyping. Martin also serves in a range of boundary-spanning roles, facilitating community collaborations, shepherding engagement projects, developing innovative technical resources, and advocating system change. Well, welcome, Kirstin and Martin.
Hello, happy to be here.
Super. So, again, so glad to have you all with us today, and we're jump into some questions related to the article that is that will be that's published here on our interface with the ILA. So we'll jump right in with our first one, which is what key question or questions were you hoping to answer as you were writing this article?
Sure. Well, I'll go ahead and start. So part of the motivation for this article has been around ongoing conversations between Martin and myself. Since I started the program here, Martin's been highly involved in digital literacy education, particularly with an emphasis on critical feminist and social justice perspectives and incorporating that into the knowledge and skills and abilities that we think of when we're trying to educate around technology. And so with my background in leadership, we were part of a couple grants and had discussed courses at the iSchool, the School of Information Sciences, we call it the iSchool. And we're talking about how there's a lot of complementary parallels between what he's been doing with his current work and focus around digital literacy and technology education, and then also my background in leadership education within the leadership field. And so we had been discussing ways that we could collaborate more specifically, in particular talking about how these parallels are very well matched, and how educators and researchers and practitioners from both fields could actually benefit from learning about what each side was doing. And so we wanted to take a first stab at kind of putting that into the discussion and really promote hopefully more and future discussions around how leadership and technology education can match.
Great. Martin, would you add anything?
Yes, for me, part of this as well is a decades-long exploration that I've had in what does it even mean to work within technology itself, and how do we move from being so thing-oriented as we are, and how many times I personally have failed at achieving that. And I've had a wonderful opportunity to work with educators, have educators do research projects using my classes as case studies, and I keep running into the same hurdles. And part of that is, how do we restructure even leadership, not just my own leadership, but the leadership of students, of colleagues, all of us together leading. And what does it mean to lead? And what does it mean to lead within the technology focused areas that we often have to go into? And that is where Kirstin and I have really had some great moments of co-exploration, co-discovery, and how we could take that forward, where we could take that, how that would help to not only transform us and our practices, but the practices of those around us who also play leadership roles each in their own way.
Very good, very good. I can see the overlap, and certainly understand now even better where the how the collaboration unfolded a bit. So thinking about the article, can you share a little bit more about the practice, and I guess the variety of instructional strategies or pedagogies that you discuss in the article, and I guess most specifically, what else can we learn from technology education to enhance digital leadership development, and where did the idea or need for this work come from?
I could jump in first, if that's okay with you, Kirstin.
Yep, definitely.
For me, we do quote the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In this, and he's a person that I have quoted for nearly 20 years now, and our need to rapidly shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. And he said this in 1967, but he said it about computers specifically in 1967. He already saw where we were headed, where we were already locked into. And using this as a guide for me, I've always tried to find ways to shift from being thing-oriented to person-oriented. And yet in 2008, I had a deep night of the soul. And in that, I was working in East St. Louis quite a bit at the time. I came to realize how much the work that I was doing personally, but also with students, taking them into East St. Louis. Many of these were studying to be future librarians in our Library and Information Science master's degree. We went in there, and yet I discovered that night how much we are often oppressors in the space, because we are maintaining the status quo. We're maintaining a thing orientation. And this disturbed me to no end. It's always disturbed me, but it was that deep night of the soul and the conversations that followed with my community partners that I discovered yet again just how much more we need to do to transform how we approach our works in digital technologies and our works within the information sciences more broadly when we work with people. And the community partners there laughed. They said how much they deeply love me, how much they want me to continue working with them. But yes, I was oppressing them. And they were frank about it. And I love them for that. And they have continued to be very frank with me at times, which is exactly what we need. But then how do we take this forward? And how do we do this in a way that advances the leadership of others? And that's where Kirstin and I have had the conversations. And Kirstin has been such a strong leader to me in how to think through some of these issues and find better ways forward in this area.
And I think, to add on to that, one of the things through Martin and I's conversation when it comes to kind of practice and pedagogy that I noticed is that a lot of the work that he has done and his courses are very similar to the ways in which, as leadership educators, we, help students identify, really come to grips with and acknowledge their own agency when it comes to leadership. So their leadership identity, stigmas around what we think of leadership, what are some of the myths around leadership, leadership versus leader, some of these different concepts that we put forth in courses, and that those are very similar to the ways in which in the tech courses that Martin teaches as well, focus on really expanding and asking those sorts of questions when it comes to technology. So in the article, we mention the sort of, drawing a picture of an innovator innovating, and that's often a big icebreaker to help participants in these courses or even workshops. Martin has gone in to do a lot of workshops in community settings where community members come in and actually learn on a very practical kind of functional level, right? How to take apart and then put together a computer, but even more so, what does being involved and engaged with technology mean? What does it mean to be a creator? What does it mean to be a participant and not just a consumer of this technology, sort of this thing-oriented view that Martin had mentioned earlier. And so I saw a lot of parallels to what we do in leadership education And it's really just taking those similar concepts and really just problematizing when we think about technology, not making these assumptions that, an app is going to solve something, that if you put something out on Facebook, for example, that means that people are going to participate or are going to engage, that there are social processes around these technical systems. And also that those technical systems were created by people, that phone was created by individuals who have their own biases. And so not to just assume that because you use it a certain way or someone else uses a certain way, that is the way that it should be used. But instead to really put the focus back on the social aspects, the people aspects that Martin was talking about, and that we need to find ways to really help students and individuals and also educators know that we can ask those same questions about technology and technology use and the processes by which groups perform using technology that we would about leadership processes and how groups get together and communicate and interact around trying to solve or address a specific issue.
Yeah, no, it's great. It gets me thinking about some things, and Kirstin, you and I have chatted about this. In fact,
yeah.
In fact, it makes me reflect a bit on the workshop we did in Atlanta a few years ago, that had me, I guess, reflecting even more so on some of the research I had done, where we looked at the different types of assessment strategies that were used in leadership education. And when you were teaching, we found from the folks that participated in the study, these were hundreds of leadership educators, some that taught online, some that taught face-to-face. And so a large majority of the face-to-face courses utilized team projects and group projects as part of their students' overall grades. But as soon as you put that class online, team projects and group projects drop down to like the 15th or 16th most used,
yep.
Instructional strategy or assessment strategy. And, does that mean that just because we're online that, group projects are no longer important, that people don't need to learn how to work with each other just because the class is online? And of course, that's not true. And one of the things that we learned through the workshop and through talking to the rest of that group was, it's all about that process and the social and the emotional that you're speaking of. And why do we think that we don't need to focus on the inherent aspects and critical components of team-based learning when we put groups online? There's got to be the forming and the norming, and we've got to do icebreakers, but they need to be technology enhanced. They need to be. Yep. We need to find other spaces for these folks to engage in that type of work, because they're not just going to, if you randomly assign somebody in learning management software and say, work together, that they're just going to fall into it and boom, they're off. That's not the case. And so that's obviously just a small component of what you're referring to. But, we can't ignore the social. So it had me thinking, very much about, just because it was created, by the Blackboard designers, for example, or Canvas or whatever, that there's a group function, doesn't mean that that just
the group will function. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, do so. That's a great way to say it. So yeah.
Definitely. And I do think, one of the good things about, our school, and I think that the history is that we have a strong legacy and tradition of online courses and online learning. And actually, Martin most recently, I don't know if it's this summer or in this spring, Martin has been very successful in actually getting engagement from participants in his online courses. And part of that, I think, is due to some of the strategies that he's employed, and to get to your point, the environment in which he's built that really encourages from the get-go participation. And we had mentioned that in our article about, even something as simple as changing the titles of people in the administrative system, right? So like Martin is a educator student or instructor student, and the students are student instructors, not kind of set to these very sort of diametric, well, you are the learner and I am the sage, right? But little things like that, which have been very successful. I don't know, Martin, if you might be able to share a little bit more of sort of how you structure and set up those environments to encourage participation. Yeah.
And I actually would bring forward both some of the strategies, but also some of the challenges that have occurred in this. It was this past spring. We tested out a hybrid offering of my Introduction to Networked Information Systems course. This is a course I've taught the longest. I started teaching it in '97. In 2000, I did the first online iteration of that course. During those years, mid-semester students had to come to campus. And so we could spend 12 hours in person doing all the hands-on things, working on a team project together, getting it launched, and then finish it off back online. But we've moved away from having students come to campus. So the challenge is, how do we do a very hands-on course, but do it online? And this time the idea was to do it hybrid. Every single session of the class, including breakout sessions each week, required us to have a mix of online and on-campus students working together. Their main projects were a mix of online and on-campus students working together. We wanted to do this from beginning to end, always collaboratively, always here and there. It's what we do as a profession. It's what we're doing right now. Right. At this very moment. And these are the sorts of things that we want to explore. But at the same time, it's a very hands-on course. We want to see the thing orientation that's so rooted within our digital technologies. It's to learn the nuts and bolts of those. It's also to learn how to be much more person-centered. And so their first project is to build a piece of electronics along with code, so that they can do this in a way that would tell a counter story about women, people of color, other minorities in technology, and the recognition that we've gone from 50% roughly of engineers and computer scientists being women in the 60s to now 18% and falling. And so it's a good hands-on. Students who are going to be future school librarians with a tech orientation that need a special certification for that are required to take this course. So this is not a course for the very tech-centered person who they're going to be the core solver of tech problems in the future. But sometimes they are going to be the informal learning makerspace in a school library, for instance, a public library, academic library. So we moved to this format. We used hands-on computers. We had to ship them out to them. They worked with the electronics. They worked through these problems, and a lot of it worked well. But to do that, we moved to a new version of Blackboard Collaborate. And that actually has removed some of the easy ways of doing interactive communications. It's moved much more towards a presentation from the top down. And so we had a struggle over that. But the bigger problem that we faced, and we have not figured out how to solve this yet, there was a moment in our conversation just a few minutes ago where I was having a few skips and jumps. And that's because I'm meeting with you all from home right now. My home is in a starter neighborhood. We bought into this early on. They said, live here a few years and then move to the good neighborhood. We found we loved this neighborhood and we stayed here. And we've really made it our home, and many of our neighbors have done the same. But it is considered a starter neighborhood. It's also a neighborhood that has a fair number and growing number of African Americans who live in this community. There are more rentals in this community. And so my upload speed on my network at my house, even though we pay for 18 megabit per second networking, that's download speed. And if we only get half of that, which oftentimes we do, or even a third, it's adequate for this kind of work. But for a few seconds, just a few minutes ago when I did this test, I was down to about 500 kilobits per second upload speeds. If that had continued, I would have had to disconnect this connection with you right now because it would have stopped working. Many of my students, not many, a few of my students, where they were working this spring, that was their home internet speed. So they were working from online, from home, and they couldn't do the work we want to do. They could listen, but they couldn't participate. And that's often how our internet has worked. The whole of my career, when I started using the internet to do what our iSchool program had, Prairie Net Community Network, opening up the internet to the community for the first time. That was a challenge we faced then. It's a challenge we face today. That has never changed. And so that became part of our learning process too. What do you do when you're trying to engage with someone at a distance and they live in a community that does not get good internet no matter how much they pay? Because the internet providers don't prioritize certain spaces.
Yeah, so there's just myriad social issues and levels of that with, certainly with respect to access and usability and utility as we think about this.
And how do we incorporate that into the leadership development process?
Right, right. So no, I appreciate you sharing that. Give us a lot more context for kind of the space that you work in and some of the initiatives you've been spearheading. So thank you for that. So as we think a little bit about more, and I guess generally the techniques from technology education, how do they, how do you feel that they are influencing, digital leadership development? And as you were working through that, what specific learning outcomes, came to mind, and how do you feel we can actually assess whether those outcomes will be met?
Part of that is to see that the challenge here is everything is mutually shaped. And I actually got to bring in AT&T folks into the conversation with the students, because the AT&T folks, we went from the first tier to the second tier in about 15 seconds. Literally, they just passed me on real quick, to the supervisors of the second tier, to the on-site technicians, to the supervisors of the region of technicians, all came to the house and had conversations with me about this. And they care passionately about this. They want to shape AT&T in a way that's better. And many corporations say thank you to having these conversations. They want to learn how to develop their leadership so that the mutual shaping here and there and here are beneficial for all. And more, especially for those most disadvantaged. So it's really wonderful that everyone wants to be a part of this, but how do we come to discover the mutual shaping that's happening, and how do we help everyone to participate in the leadership process, each in their own way? And that is the continuing struggle to find that path. And it's a difficult path. It's an ever-changing path. And it's one that, as Paulo Freire says, the best we can do is discover the new reality, the new world that we've never seen before, only to see the starting point for working together to discover the new reality that we want to get to.
Right. And I think too, kind of on a more granular note, a lot of what has been incorporated into the courses with Martin's framework that we mentioned in the article, this critical socio-technical framework, has been, even though students might come in with an expectation that this is an introduction to network systems and I'm going to be building a computer and working with an electronic board and figuring out circuits, the incorporation of readings and activities, I mean, before every session, where students actually get into a practical hands-on skill around technology, starts with a discussion of a selection of readings where we are bringing forward these concepts of interconnectedness of different systems, political, socio-cultural, economic systems around technology. And so it's expanding the students' view that even anything, and educators, anything as simple as, well, I come into this class about coding, so I'm assuming I'm going to learn how to code, making it very clear from the get-go that that coding is a part of it, and that coding is maybe the priority, and though it's not the only thing that we need to talk about. Because if we are wanting to find ways to incorporate technology to use these opportunities and technology to sort of help individuals and to do things that they want to be able to do, we need to acknowledge that there are differences in how people have access and utilize these tools, and that from a leadership standpoint, being aware of those systems and being aware of questions that you need to ask or situations that you need to pay attention to is an important part of learning the technology, but then also learning the technology within a social context. And you need to pay attention to those factors that maybe aren't as apparent if you were just came in and thought you were going to be building and rebuilding a computer, right? So,
and that's what Kirstin has brought forward to me, is this concept of how to promote relational principled leadership. You know, how do we really focus more and more on identity, on privilege, on participation, and help each of us to discover that together in ourselves, in others, and how do we build the bridges that actually allow us to work through some of these very challenging issues.
That's great. No, I appreciate this. There's so much that we can learn between these, overlaps, just between, the use of technology in our social systems. And I appreciate how much that you've integrated that, because, go back in time 20 years and so much of our technology education focused on, is this a cup holder or a CD-ROM drive? But not so much the social systems and the social aspects of our use of technology in groups. And I'm so curious to see, where the future will lie with some of these, and the advent of the virtual reality and some of these other things that are coming. But I think that's for another time. So we'll close out with this question. Where do you see some of the future research or writing headed in this area? What are you all working on or writing about next?
Kirstin?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. I mean, I think that there are some great people in leadership education who are concerned, thinking about this and continuing to work on it. I see Josie Alquist's work, for example, and particularly some of the things that she's been doing and sort of influencers and in highlighting administrators and student affairs and leadership education who are actually utilizing technology in a very authentic, genuine way. And there's many others through the work of, NASPA and the Tech Knowledge Group and things like that. I think for me, personally, I think, now within the information sciences and sort of this field and trying to incorporate my passion and background around leadership education, it's continuing work that I've done with Martin and kind of really from a pedagogical standpoint, from a teaching standpoint, helping to say that, when we're thinking about information literacies, when we're thinking about digital literacies, when we're thinking about technology literacies, these skills and perspectives that tend to sit, very solidly within sort of thinking about technology, that there should be and needs to be an incorporation to relational competencies, leadership competencies, communication, that this social interpersonal dimensions, critical dimensions, and also concerns with in-groups and out-groups and privilege need to be a part of that discussion. And that is already happening. And though I think that the part of my work is really around clarifying that and helping hopefully transfer some of the models and frameworks from leadership education into this field so that educators here can use them as tools to really expand and deepen their work. And then also, I think just continuing to look at leadership from an information perspective to understand using some of the theories and models from information sciences, leadership in our library and information sciences, what are ways that we continue to expand this concept of leadership, particularly thinking about how people understand and use and gain information around what leadership is, about their own leadership, how that then is shared and used within groups, how groups can make use of information around leadership to, address their goals or their needs or what they're trying to accomplish. And so, continuing to refine and add value and perspective and depth to those concepts is something that I see is an important area of work that I'm really focused on.
Yeah.
Thanks. Pardon?
For me, actually, Nicole Cook, Dr. Nicole Cook, a professor here at the iSchool at Illinois, she has written some really good books on this topic, Information Services for Diverse Populations. She was a co-editor on Teaching for Justice. She and I have been working on a range of different things in this relation to this now, as well as Kirstin and I working together moving forward as well. And those are two helpful starting points in just digging deeper in these particular issues. For me, I really, I'm moving more and more into the teaching role, because this really is where I can find the most beneficial, hopeful pathway forward in my own thinking on this. I've developed a course that I'll start teaching its second iteration of in 90 minutes called Informal Learning Spaces and Pedagogies. And that's been a place where we're exploring exactly these kinds of issues, but more within informal learning spaces. I teach courses like community engagement, where we're looking at how do we just engage with the community in the first place, as well as that Introduction to Networked Information Systems course where we're exploring this. And along that lines, this has actually been kind of a rapid expanding surprise, is that it looks like we're going to do a Publishing Without Walls book, the core of which has to be completed in 2 more weeks. And then we have the rest of the summer to finish this. But this is a person-oriented guide to demystifying technology. And this is being written in a Creative Commons share-alike process, where there's an expectation that there will be rapid redesigns of this book and remixes that will be ongoing continuously. The edition that we're working on is the instructor's guide. And so students coming into the Introduction to Networked Information Systems course in the fall will be going through this instructor's guide with the expectation that they're going to take on leadership roles and looking, how do we do this person-centered focus on demystifying technology in our workspaces, wherever they may end up being. But at the same time, 2 students from the spring hybrid course, both added distance students, are joining in to begin writing immediately a remix for K-5 students. We also recognize that you don't start at the master's level in trying to look at these issues. You start at the kindergarten level, and you start in the pre-K levels and even before that. But we've already been working with a local elementary school. We've had second graders doing a lot of the practice that I do with the master students. They seem more comfortable with it than a lot of my master students do. And so writing this right away as a remix, and I've got another team who are just starting to get into the process, and their goal will be to write a remix of this for formerly incarcerated people so that they can go through this. And so it's person to person. How can we move this forward and remix it rapidly so that this person-centered focus on technologies and demystifying those technologies will be happening at all levels. And so that's an area where I'm putting a lot of my focus right now in moving forward.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks to both of you, Kirstin and Martin, for joining us today. And so, as a reminder, the Pause for Pedagogy, it's an initiative of the Leadership Education Member Interest Group of the International Leadership Association, and articles and videos are available at www.ila-net.org, and you can follow us on Twitter at @the_ILA. Thank you so much, Kirstin and Martin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.